And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Darcy Luoma. How are you, Darcy?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
So to get started, let's just share a little bit about the Darcy Luoma story.
Yes. So my story is I have always been passionate about helping create high-performing people and teams. I have loved doing that since I can remember, and I formalized it when I went to get trained and certified as a coach originally in 2004, and am now a master certified coach, and also have a credential in organization and relationship systems coaching. And I do a lot of keynote speaking and workshops, trainings, team coaching, and everything is around how do you solve your people problems and those hurdles that get in the way of being high performing.
Yeah. It's interesting. Every leader you speak to or every manager you speak to and you ask them about what are the issues, what are the concerns, what's keeping you awake at night, usually the people issue, the people problem, or one particular people problem is taking a lot of their energy and focus as a leader. So what was it that compelled you to dive into this particular area?
I started to notice that my clients, I've been coaching for years. I've had hundreds of clients, and I started to notice that the problems that they brought into our coaching sessions were all similar. That every client, no matter if they were running the company, if they were a VP, if they were a frontline director or a frontline employee, that they all had similar problems that they were struggling with. And so I took a couple of years to research and categorize all of those problems so that we could see what were the themes and the patterns. And what we came up with is that every person that comes into coaching struggles with one of 6 main problems, hurdles, obstacles. And that became the basis for our Thoughtfully Fit model, because when you can handle yourself thoughtfully, regardless of what the problems are, then you can more quickly get back to doing what you do best. Yeah. Instead of handling those obstacles in an impulsive way and overreacting, where not only do you have the original problem that you had, now you have to go back and clean up the mess that you made from not handling it well in the first place.
So tell me a little bit about Thoughtfully Fit. I know it's a book that you've written, Thoughtfully Fit, Your Training Plan for Life and Business Success. So share a little bit about the book.
The book outlines those 6 hurdles and how you can train to overcome them. And the core premise is that just like if you want to be physically fit, you need to train and you need to practice. You can't wake up tomorrow and decide you're going to run a marathon if you haven't been training, or at least you can't do it without a lot of pain and injury. In the same way, if you want to handle yourself well in all of your relationships, and have a business and a life that is successful, you can train and practice mentally and strengthen that mental muscle to be able to not overreact when something happens, to not say yes when you mean no, right? So that you can set healthy boundaries so that you aren't overwhelmed. You can have a training focus that helps you handle any obstacle that comes your way.
I like that, Darcy. I really do, because in so many people, especially at the moment in the crisis that still sort of envelops the world, a lot of people are going through stress and really some serious mental anguish. And often I find the people that are prepared for that, and when I say prepared, it's that whole concept of training and development and growth and all of those aspects where people can trust in their preparation, that they've got the skills or the mindset to be able to cope with some of the challenges that they face. We see them coming through the crisis in a much better shape than other people that are potentially leading day to day. So what sort of training and preparation can leaders do that's going to help them be better moving forward?
Well, at the core of the thoughtfully fit model, just like if you are training to be physically fit and you have a strong core, every movement's easier, whether it's basketball or skiing or just even putting your own suitcase up in the overhead bin on the airplane, and you're less likely to get injured. Thoughtfully fit also has a core, and it's 3 simple steps. Step 1 is to pause.
Yeah.
Step 2 is to think, and step 3 is to act, so that you can be intentional and thoughtful. Instead of, I had a client say to me, oh, I realized, Darcy, I do it backwards. I act, and then I pause and think, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
That is such a that's a powerful model, and it's so simple because most people do act with emotion. And often, no matter what the emotion is, whether it's you're highly energized or highly excited or incredibly angry, no matter what the emotion is, it usually isn't the best thing to be acting on. And that concept of pausing and thinking and then acting just makes so much sense.
It does, and it's so simple, and yet it's not easy. But the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
And if I could, Coach Curl, give kudos to you, because when we hopped on the interview before we went live, you had commented that you had a late night last night and that it's really early there for you in Australia and it's a rainy day. And yet you said immediately, and here I am, and we're going to do this, and it's going to be good. There's a mental strength that you just exhibited beautifully there. Sort of pause and think, okay, how do I want to show up in this moment? I have a choice.
Yeah.
What do I focus on? I focus on what do I control? I don't control the fact that it's rainy out,
Yeah.
the fact that I maybe didn't get as much sleep as I want or didn't, right? But I do control in this moment how I'm going to show up in this conversation.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful model of being thoughtfully fit.
And when I've got a guest as exciting as you, it makes it so much easier, Darcy.
Thank you.
So one of the things that comes to my mind when you're talking about pause, think and act is a really good mentor of mine that I had during my leadership career talked to me about the feedback rules. And once again, it's a really simple concept that he shared with me because a lot of leaders don't provide feedback. And a lot of the reason is because they're not quite sure how the other person's going to react or respond or get defensive, and it creates a scene, all those sorts of things. So a lot of leaders will actually hold back from providing feedback. And what he shared with me was that what he does with his teams is that he encourages them to use the feedback rules. And the feedback rules are really simple. When someone's giving you feedback, feedback is a gift and we need to acknowledge it as that. But he said the only responsibility I want someone to have when they're taking feedback is to smile, listen, and say thanks. And what he found, and subsequently what I found by implementing that model, is that it actually creates a much better free flow of feedback, and it creates a situation where people intentionally check themselves. Much like what I'm thinking that you would see with some of your success stories in and around the pause, think, and act. Would that be a fair? What are some of the success stories that you've seen with that?
Yes, absolutely. And as you're talking, there's both sides of that equation. So there is the person who is receiving the feedback. And I love that, to just smile and receive it and say thank you and listen, as opposed to getting defensive, shutting down, getting angry. And remembering that feedback always says more about the giver than the receiver. So you get to smile and say thank you, and then you can process it and identify what you want to do with that feedback and move forward. So there's the receiver, and then there's the giver of the feedback, which is how you started this part of the conversation, saying a lot of leaders struggle to give feedback. And they're like, oh, well, maybe it'll just get better on its own, or I don't want them to feel bad. And it's a muscle that for many people is not well developed. And so one of the things that I work with my clients on and that we talk about in the Thoughtfully Fit book, one strategy is, and this falls under the practice of balance in Thoughtfully Fit, right?
Okay.
There's 6 practices that align with those obstacles. So how do you balance what you want and need with what the other person wants and needs? And that's where the strongest relationships come in. And so using the 3 C's. So if I need to give you some feedback, Tony, the 3 C's are courage, compassion, and curiosity. And many of us are high and strong on one or maybe 2 of those. So the people that have a harder time giving feedback oftentimes are really high and strong in compassion. So you got that. Compassion, great. Keep that strong. But now turn up the volume on the courage to be able to say, hey, so I wanted to give you some feedback because I've noticed every time you come into our team meetings, you're late and you're distracted. And it really has an impact on the team. And I'm telling you this, so that's courage, right?
Yeah.
Tough message. That's what I want and need. I'm telling you this because you are such a valuable team member. And I'm not even sure if you realize the impact that it has. And I want to give that gift to you of that feedback. That's compassion. And then the curiosity. So I'm curious, what's happening for you in that moment, or what's going on in your life? Is everything okay? Is there something that we could design around the meeting so that you weren't late, or so that you could show up and be more present? And when you can show up and give feedback and think about those 3 C's, every single time the client comes back to our next coaching session and says, "Oh, I feel so much better," and it worked.
Yeah. I can imagine, and once again, that just makes sense. But often, as you alluded to earlier, some of the things that make sense are still incredibly hard work, because the person that we're working with is ourselves, and we're telling ourselves a story. We're sharing our own fears and our own anguishes and anxiety, and a lot of the times that's the thing that's holding us back. So to have a framework and that intentional checkpoint to be courageous, I think is just a really, really strong aspect. I speak a little to my clients in relation to the concept of coaching courage. And when I initially talk to them about that, they think that I'm coaching boldness and braveness and taking a risk. But fundamentally, what I talk about in that game, very similar to what you're sharing, is I want you to coach courage in your team to be able to share with you what you need to know, and not just be told things that they want you to hear, that they believe that you want to hear. So there is a big difference for a leader. And to be able to create that safe place where people are actually quite open to being courageous with their leader and sharing their thoughts, their best practices, their ideas, and not just going with the flow, I think is so critical for a leader.
You're right on. And the highest performing teams, people are often surprised that the highest performing teams have a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
And that's why they're high performing, because they aren't just going with the flow and status quo and saying, "Oh, yes, whatever you say, Madam or Mr. Leader." They are saying, okay, well, I understand why you're proposing that's the strategy. And can I offer another perspective that might shift the strategy a little bit? So when you have that safety and that emotional and psychological safety in a team, that person feels comfortable to stand up to the leader and to disagree and to give a different opinion. So the result is stronger. Yeah. You debate internally and then defend externally. And that internal debate can be done in a way that is healthy and respectful and thoughtful, so that you get the best result.
And they're doing it to add value. They're not doing it to butt heads. They're seeing something that they believe they can add value to, and they're sharing that. And that can only be a better outcome. I've been in many meetings, and I know you've spoken about this concept as well, but I've been to many meetings where you've got, whether it's a national manager, a state manager, or a regional manager up there sharing strategies, sharing thoughts, sharing initiatives, and the room is silent. The room is silent. No one says anything. And then after the meeting, when everyone's getting their coffee and their bickies, and that's when the real meeting starts to happen, where people start to say, oh my God, how are we going to do that? Money's short. We've got no expenses. I've lost my best team member. I don't think it's going to work. So the meeting after the meeting starts to then impact whatever the message was at the meeting.
Yes. And we call that, I have a term for that, the post-meeting meeting.
Yeah.
Yes. Where the real conversation is happening. And unfortunately, what that means is people aren't bought in. In general, people need to weigh in to be able to buy in.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a chance to weigh in and ask questions and disagree and have a different opinion, they're going to leave, have that post-meeting meeting, and oftentimes sabotage whatever the leader is wanting.
Yeah.
And it's not that when they weigh in that the leader has to necessarily, the leader shouldn't wait for consensus, because that would take too long and you'd miss the window of opportunity.
Yeah.
But to say, I want to hear your feedback, poke holes in it, ask the tough questions, and let's, figure out what really the best, anything that you're going to go say afterwards to your colleague, I'd prefer you say it now, so that the decision that I make is the most informed decision. The decision that I make will still have some of you that disagree with it. And then the key is, once people have had a chance to weigh in, then they can buy in if the leader says, thank you for that feedback, super helpful. Based on all of that, I'm going to change my position a little bit, and here's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Now, there's a bunch of you out there who don't agree with that. What do you need in order to get behind this decision?
Yeah.
Instead of not asking the question, and then they go and have that post-meeting meeting, say, well, that's all nice in theory, but that's not going to work because, and you invite that conversation in the moment. What do you need in order to get behind this decision?
Yeah. And for a leader, that may seem that they've got to take additional steps and put in additional energy to make sure that that's happening. But the challenge there that we need leaders to acknowledge is it better to do it there, or is it better to do it 3 weeks later when the initiative's not happening, or there's no urgency, or there's no outcomes, or there's no performance? I know as a leader where I would prefer to be playing, and that's investing some time and resources in the initial meeting, conversation, whatever that looks like, and investing in that to get as strong a buy-in as I possibly can and get people feeling valued about the impact that they've had.
Yes. And the great news is if that's how you want to lead, you can train and practice to be able to lead that way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times our default is we're nervous. We don't want to put it out there and open ourselves up to, criticism. And so we wait 3 weeks and it doesn't work. You can create some structures and processes up front to get that conversation happening instead of 3 weeks later, people are sabotaging it.
Yeah. Fantastic. And it's that whole trust in your preparation. It's, funnily enough, as a leader, I used to hold large team meetings. I'd have 100-odd people there at a team meeting, and many times I would just wing it and waffle it. Waffle and wing it, I'd call it. Let me at it. I know what I've got to say. And then every single time I had a waffle and wing it, I would always think, I didn't mention this, or I missed that, or I missed that. And finally, I got sick of that as a leader, so I started to prepare a little bit more, and then all of a sudden the meetings were more productive, the communication was so much better, and we got better buy-in and better alignment. And I wasn't walking away from the meeting saying, I should have, because I'd already done that as part of the preparation. So the concept of training is absolutely relevant with myself. So with the thoughtfully fit, now your training plan for life and business. So obviously this is not just about becoming a better leader. This is about being balanced as a person. What I'm reading into that title, balanced as a person, maybe a little bit healthier, maybe a little bit fitter, maybe that person that's able to run a marathon as opposed to the person that can't run a marathon. Is that part of the concept as well, Darcy?
Well, the concept is that you get to define, so Thoughtfully Fit, the book, I coach people. And when I'm coaching, I'm holding the client as the expert, that they know what's best in their life. And I'm helping create that space and ask powerful, thoughtful questions and mirror back what I'm hearing for them to decide. I'm not coming in as a mentor or a consultant or a trainer would to say, here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so the book is designed in the same way for you to identify what you want in your life. What does success look like? And then how do you achieve that? For some people, that might be literally running a marathon or some kind of a physical feat. Yeah. There are others, though, who are like, oh, good Lord, no, heavens, no, that is not of interest to me. Okay, what is of interest to you? What would success and joy and happiness look like in your life? Maybe it's being able to get that master's degree that you wanted. Maybe it's being able to get certified as a scuba instructor. Maybe there's something else, but you just kind of can't have the time and the energy to do it because you're caught up in reactively, unconsciously living your life. Yeah. Instead of pausing and really thinking, what does bring me joy? What is it that I want? What is the healthiest, happiest, most successful version of me? And then you can act accordingly.
That makes so much sense. I love that. I made a note of it, expert in your life, because that's probably one of the best ways that that's been captured for me as a coach. It's a really simple thing. People can understand that. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
It is simple, and for some people it's confusing. When I go into organizations and I do a lot of trainings on how to create a coaching culture and how to help managers embrace a coaching approach, there's always, maybe not always, but often a misperception that coaching is telling somebody what they should do. Yeah. And they're actually thinking of mentoring. I'm a big fan of mentoring, but mentoring is not coaching. If I'm a mentor, I am the expert. Let me tell you, I've had some, wisdom and can share with you. And people will get confused because they'll think of a sports coach where the sports coach is saying, okay, you're going to do these drills and they're very directive. When you're talking about leadership and executive coaching or life coaching, it's opposite. The person is the expert in their life, and they hold the wisdom on where they want to go, and then what are the obstacles getting in the way.
Yeah, very good way to put it. And often in the intake sessions that we have with clients, often I'll ask the question, what is it that you're wanting out of this coaching relationship? And let's define that, and let's really make sure that we're on the right path. And a lot of the times the client is looking for that mentoring or, training in some respects. They're looking for guidance on best ways forward. And sometimes you find coaching relationships, there's a little bit of a mix. Often I'll share a story that's relative to what the person's going through, which brings them an aha moment based around some theory. But then ultimately the question's got to come back to them. Okay, what does that mean for you, and how can we utilize that within what it is that you do? So coaching is one of the misunderstood professional tasks out there, because you're right, so many people see it as that sporting coach, that hard taskmaster, and fundamentally it isn't. So it's more powerful than that. I think
it is powerful, and that's where a leader can take a coaching approach. Yeah. So a direct report employee comes in and says, oh, I'm so frustrated with Joe. He did this again. And the leader oftentimes will jump in and, give advice. Okay, well, here's what you need to do. Or even other times say, okay, I'll call Joe. I'll handle it. I'll deal with it. Yeah. And all you're doing then is creating a revolving door instead of coaching the person to say, I've noticed this is the third time this month that you've come in complaining about the relationship with Joe. What's the relationship you want to have with him? Mm-hmm. And what would it look like? How much of this have you shared with him? And what would it look like if your relationship felt aligned and really strong? And what's getting in the way of you having that conversation with Joe instead of with me? Yeah. And all of a sudden at the end of that, just like you said, Tony, when a client comes in, I'll say, what do you want coaching on? The leader can do the same thing, hold the person as the expert. Oh, you want some coaching around how to deal with Joe? Great. And at the end, they leave with their problem, right?
Yeah.
They don't leave the monkey on your back.
Yeah. They're not subcontracting that problem out to the leader. And there's a couple of little things there that often leaders feel compelled to do that because, whether it's part of their understanding of their particular role or whether it's because they feel good being the go-to person. But you mentioned curiosity as part of one of your frameworks, and curiosity as a leader is just one of those keys that I see for them to be able to coach effectively, to have that genuine curiosity about, so what would you do in this situation, to actually take the time to ask a question instead of delivering an action and saying, this is what you should do. What do you think we should do is probably the most basic fundamental question to ask. But that genuine curiosity to actually know what the other person is wanting to do or thinks they should do provides you a real base then to improve as a leader. So,
yes, and you make a great point that sometimes ego gets in the way. I know I ran the U.S. Senator's office for 12 years, and the first 5-6 years, I was the manager, the leader who had an open door policy. And I thought that was a good thing. Yeah. And all day long, every day, I had, Darcy, do you got a minute? Darcy, I've got Darcy. And bringing me problems, and I was solving them. Or either, I'd solve it and say what they need to do. And then when they'd go and try to do it and there was a snag, they'd come back and say, I tried to do that, but the person you told me to call is on vacation. Now what? And I was creating dependence on me. Yeah. Or I would say, oh, this is a bad one. Let me handle it. And the problem with that, while I was solving problems, I was exhausted and I wasn't doing my own work. And I certainly wasn't being innovative or strategic at all because I was putting out all these fires. And so it really took me some significant training as a leader to shift how I showed up because I thought that was a good thing to be solving people's problems.
To be indispensable, absolutely.
Yes.
Darcy, who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
Oh, well, I would say probably the person who most inspired me is the U.S. Senator that I worked for, Herb Kohl. He modeled compassionate servant leadership and not doing for others what they can do for themselves, giving back, delegating, empowering, appreciating staff. We worked so hard for him because he was so grateful. I think he's probably somebody who has had the biggest impact.
Excellent.
For me.
Now, when you look at the traits that we've seen previously in great leaders, are they the same traits that we need today for today's leaders?
The traits from leadership.
Yeah, so some of the great historical figures or people that we've worked with in the past that were great leaders, are they still the same characteristics that today's leaders should be aiming to have?
I think that the core traits and characteristics of leadership have not changed. Those cores are the same. And leaders today have added dynamics and added characteristics and new skills that they have to be able to master because of the sheer pace and flow of information with social media, the dynamics of remote leading and having teams that, whether it is because we're a global workplace now in many cases or because of COVID and some of those dynamics, that leaders have additional skills they need to layer on top of the traditional historical skills that I think still are absolutely necessary. Yeah,
there's so many different complexities now, and the pace of change, even prior to COVID, has been phenomenal. And then I think what we've seen with COVID is that it's accelerated so many things, some good, the use of technology and systemizing and productivity performance benefits that we're seeing out of that. But some of it not so good. We're missing some of that connection of people within, workplaces. Not saying that it was in a fundamentally great space for everyone prior to COVID, but when you don't even have the chance to personally or socially connect with people because everyone's sitting in their offices at home. So, there are so many different complexities that leaders need to face or lean into today. So,
yes.
During our journey, Darcy, there's always those inevitable troughs that we face. We get some amazing highs. We also get some pretty damaging lows. So tell me about your relationship with failure.
Relationship with?
Failure.
Failure. Oh. Ooh. We're tight. I gave one example when I was running the senator's office, how I had a blind spot. I thought I was being a great leader, and here I was failing fabulously because I was creating dependence. I was not motivating other people. In my own business that I'm running, I think one of the mantras that we embrace is to fail fast. Like, let's try a new idea, let's put it out there, and that goes against my innate DNA, which is I've got this inner trash talk, this saboteur whose name is Little Miss Perfect Pants. She wants to wait until everything is perfect before we execute.
Yeah.
And so I have had to consciously say, it's okay if we fail. We're just going to learn and it's going to get better. And if we wait until it's perfect, we'll lose the opportunity.
Little Miss Perfect Pants. That's many people name their inner critic or their inner judge, or I've heard a lot of people call it the gremlin, but I've never heard Little Miss Perfect Pants. But sums her up beautifully, doesn't it? And probably there's so many people listening to this right now that are saying, yes, I've got a Little Miss Perfect Pants as well.
That's right.
Waiting for everything to be aligned, and it's a procrastination of everything's got to be perfect before we jump. So, yeah. So you've written a book, which is awesome, but what are you currently reading?
Oh, well, gosh, I'm reading. I typically have a whole stack of books by my bedstand. One of the books that I'm rereading right now is Traction.
Okay.
That's a business strategy, how to run your company book that we embraced. And it's made all the difference in the world of how I lead my team and our strategic planning and what rocks we focus on every quarter. That's one that it's at the top of my pile right now.
Excellent. Once again, it's really interesting. A lot of leaders have a pile of books that they're in various stages of working their way through. And it's interesting because I find leaders gravitate and they look for a message, and they'll find that in one book, in one chapter, and then they'll come back to it later on when they need to get some more depth. And it's probably the majority of leaders don't necessarily read a book cover to cover. They're looking for those key messages, and they're looking for what they can implement and act on. So in saying that, what books had the biggest impact on you?
Oh, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
By Viktor Frankl. I first read that in the early 90s. I was in a leadership course in college, and it was powerful. And since then, I have reread it many times. And just the intensity of Viktor Frankl's message that you don't control what happens, but you always control how you respond to it.
Yeah.
If he could do it in such an extreme situation in a concentration camp, I often am embracing that mindset and channeling him. Excellent.
And once again, we get a lot of leaders that go back to that book or books of a similar ilk as why books with their biggest impact. And once again, it's about the learning and the takeaways. So,
yeah.
And once again, I see leaders that can implement what they're reflecting on, what's had impact within what it is that they're reading. They're the ones that can actually talk about what they've books that have had an impact. So many leaders, unfortunately, will read a book and not necessarily get any sort of impact out of it. It's just something that they've done. And that's crazy when you're looking at books as being such a positive and cost-effective way for you to grow and reflect as a leader. So
it's the cheapest, easiest way to develop yourself. I mean, I believe in, and I'm regularly hiring my own coaches and therapists and consultants. But to spend $20, $30 on a book that might spark some new insights, or oftentimes it just reminds me, right? There's not a lot of new concepts out there. It's just a different way of framing up similar concepts that are characteristics of leadership that are important, that it's like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just a refresher, as you were saying. So
yes,
it's something that had an impact that suddenly got kicked out of our brain for whatever reason. Then all of a sudden, oh, that's right, that worked for me. So out of everything, Darcy, that you've accomplished over the last couple of years, what are you most proud of?
I am most proud of the place I'm at and my daughters are at. I have daughters who are 15 and 14. In the Thoughtfully Fit book, I describe how that model, it came alive on a Saturday in March of 2016. And 5 days later, it came alive after years of research. We finally finalized the model. It's like, yes. And 5 days later, I got a phone call from my neighbor asking, she said, Darcy, what is going on at your house? And I said, I'm not at home. Why? And she said, because there's a SWAT team and 40 or 50 police cars with guns surrounding your house. And they just took John out in handcuffs, barefoot. What? My husband? What? My husband was arrested that day. I found out later for sexual assault of a minor he had met online. It was a day before our 10-year wedding anniversary. He was a full-time stay-at-home dad to our two daughters, who at the time were 8 and 9. He was arrested, ultimately convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, and never came home. And I am so proud of the fact that my daughters worked through that, and that they are loving, healthy, grounded, compassionate, sassy teenagers. and am proud of the fact. I mean, I became ground zero to test drive Thoughtfully Fit.
Absolutely.
Which is what I highlight in the book. I'm proud of that. Because it was the biggest nightmare I ever had to overcome.
I can't even imagine what you went through in dealing with that. So if there,
horrible.
It's horrible to think of a situation like that as being a guinea pig scenario, but you certainly picked up some scars and worked through that, no doubt, through that sort of situation. And wow, what a story to leave towards the end of our podcast. So people, I hope you've hung around, because that's a doozy. So is there anything that I haven't asked you, Darcy, that I should have asked you?
What a fun question. Anything you haven't asked that you should? I mean, oh my gosh, there's so many fun things we could talk about, but I don't think there's anything in particular that you haven't asked. You're so curious and great at keeping the conversation just flowing. So no, nothing I can think of. Excellent.
So finally, how can people connect with you? So no doubt there are people out there that are dying to connect with you and find out more about Thoughtfully Fit and the framework. So how can people connect with you?
Thank you. Yeah, 2 ways. I mean, there's lots of ways, but my website is darcyluoma.com. And I also, and there's free resources. I've got my Thoughtfully Fit blog and videos and all sorts of stuff. I'm on all social media channels. But also for anybody who is curious about those 6 hurdles, they go to thoughtfullyfit.com. There's a free quiz. It's a 2 or 3 minute quiz that you can take, and it'll identify for you what's your biggest hurdle that's getting in the way of success, and then what's a key strategy to overcome and to clear that hurdle so that you can move forward to get back to doing what you do best. So thoughtfullyfit.com is where that quiz is.
No worries, and we will have all those links in the show notes. So Darcy Luoma, it's been amazing having you on the Today's Leader podcast. Thank you so much for investing in today's leaders.
Thank you. It is truly an honor. I appreciate the time to be with you, Tony.